what, if any, impact do you think the outcome of this election may have on this industry? Kate Baxter, is it something you look at with any concern?
I think we try to look at everything in a positive light. When you look at who's fighting for solar or for renewables in general, pretty much every party is, other than our famous UKIP friends who should be fighting for solar as an independent source of non-government controlled energy. But they're not quite to that same point that we see their friends in the Tea Party in the U.S. at. But I don't think there's necessarily a bad party at this point, other than UKIP for us. There's definitely an interesting mix that could change the potential for the solar industry, but we're not afraid of whoever goes into office.
Paul Barwell, if I can just put a similar thing to you, although yeah, most of the parties, none of them are sort of seeking particularly to undermine solar. Energy has been a big political plaything, particularly the cost of energy over the last few years. If it once again became an issue, price freezes and things like that suggested by the Labour Party, would that be an issue that would concern you?
I mean, energy price freezes not so much. I think there was a lot of concern back towards the end of 2013 when the Big Six were trying to explain why their costs were going up, and they were blaming renewables. And I think that was obviously very unjustifiable, particularly when
it's part of the reason, isn't it?
Well, if you take solar alone, if we hit 20 gigawatts, we would be £11 on the consumer bill. Now, that is a very cheap cost, and that also factors in a huge amount of legacy costs. Per unit, we're getting much, much cheaper as time goes on. So it is something that we're very wary of. Last year, or perhaps just in the last 6 months, we haven't had to worry about that because energy prices have been going down, and there's a sort of a big trade-off there as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for renewables. But I think confidence in the market, confidence in investment has a greater overall long-term impact for renewables rather than this huge volatility in fossil fuel prices. So, I think it's something that we're aware of, but I don't have a huge amount of concern about it long-term, short-term.
Ben, we haven't heard a lot of politicians making the case for the low-carbon future in this election, about why people should be voting for it and arguably paying for it as well. Do you find that a bit disappointing?
I think, as Paul mentioned, if the election was 18 months, 2 years ago, energy prices perhaps would have been a bigger issue in this election. It's not right now. People care more about the NHS, which differentiates perhaps between the parties. And as Kate mentions, there is broadly a consensus between all the central political parties that we're on a trajectory for decarbonisation of the power sector to some extent or another by 2030. The difference is how bumpy the road will be along the way. We've had a really bumpy last 5 years, the next 5 years might be very bumpy, might be a little bit bumpy, we don't know. But the general trajectory over the next 15 years is very, very strong for renewables in general and solar in particular, because solar is almost certainly the cheapest way to deliver the decarbonisation agenda.
Jonathan Scull, the politicians have had something to say about solar on farms, particularly in field solar. Are you concerned that if the Conservatives get back in, they will put further pressure on in-field solar, and the beam, if you like, Sauron's eye will turn away from onshore wind and really focus on saying we don't want in-field solar?
I mean, the NFU has been fairly clear. We've posted up our key asks of all the political parties in the run-up to the general election. Frankly, we would just like to see greater consistency in energy policy, and we'd like to see an end to some of these rather mixed messages coming from different government departments. I think the other speakers have said there's very clearly important policy drivers, reasons why all political parties should be supporting a transition to a low-carbon economy. We can deliver that in a number of different ways. We're certainly very convinced that this is entirely compatible with agricultural interests, and it supports profitable farming at the end of the day.
So just coming to that point, are you at all concerned that the forthcoming government might get tougher on the idea of in-field solar?
Our members are interested right the way across the solar spectrum. There's an awful lot of rooftop stuff now. We're seeing more opportunity to unlock the large commercial roofs as well. As long as government policy did not move too far into what we consider completely unreasonable, then yes, some rebalancing of the market may be necessary.
Rebalance, but slightly tighter conditions on what kind of land they should be on, maybe not grade 1 agriculture.
Well, indeed, but again, some of these arguments were aired yesterday in the planners' workshop. It depends really on what part of the country you're in. Some parts of the country have got a shortage of best and most versatile land. In other parts of the country, virtually all of the land is a high quality agricultural land, and if farmers are not going to be completely denied the opportunity to do solar farms, say in Lincolnshire or Cambridgeshire, then there just has to be a reasonable process of site selection.
Thank you, Graham. Please, anybody from the floor? I've got plenty of questions, but I'm sure you may have as well. Yes, the gentleman there. Once again, you can keep your questions nice and tight, and if possible, directed to 1 or 2 people, maybe not the whole panel. That'd be great. Yes, sir.
Actually, I'd like to ask it to the whole panel.
I may bet it, but carry on.
Which party do you think would be best for solar?
Okay, that's very. You can all give one-word answers to that. Yeah, thank you.
Short-term, long-term. Short-term, some of the things that Conservatives are looking at, such as cutting CFD policy support for and all subsidy support going forward for onshore wind, could be very good for solar. However, their long-term plan and the detail of their plan for solar is not as beautiful as Labour's.
Thank you. Ben?
I live in this constituency, and the Lib Dems are clearly the people to vote for here if you were to solar, but elsewhere it depends on the local game and the local tactics.
Paul?
I mean, if you read the manifestos, Labour seems to be the one that's most enthusiastic about solar. My concern, of course, is having to re-educate this government as they come in, because we need to do an awful lot of things in the first 6 months, so there is a little bit of a trade-off. But from a manifesto standpoint, Labour would seem to be the one for solar.
Jonathan, I know the NFU is non-party political, but
I was about to say that. And so we're not really allowed to say. I mean, our ask clearly is across, whatever the colour of the whatever the colour of the future government that we will be working with, we have made our asks pretty clear. We represent a very broad church, a wide range of farmer interests. Our individual members clearly are entitled to vote for whoever they choose.
Thank you very much. Some impressively candid answers there. Yes, gentleman in the blue shirt.
I'm not sure from LDA design. The video that we opened the conference with this morning, and Nick Boyle's comments, gave to me an impression that with solar and renewables we're on an inevitability towards them becoming the dominant way of generating energy. How worried should we be about the fossil fuel incumbency and their ability to derail either a government in terms of policy or indeed just an industry?
I guess that was the purpose of that presentation this morning, was to give a feeling of inevitability. But Paul Barwell, is that inevitability there?
I think the inevitability is there. I think we need to be extremely conscious about the fossil fuel backlash. I mean, we've all discussed the millions that gets thrown into the lobbying behind fracking and oil and the old style of energy. It's just an absolute fraction of what we've managed to put together as the few trade associations that represent renewables around the place. But I think the tide is certainly turning. It is going to happen. It's a question of when and how many obstacles we can deal with over a period of time. But
I was just going to add to that, the fossil fuel and also the wind industry have very, very well-funded lobbyists, and if you're not already a member of the Solar Trade Association, you should really park some cash and join. Because without the lobbying, it will make our day jobs harder.
There's also now a number of other associations as well as our wonderful STI that we also are members of. But I think, interestingly enough, the fossil fuel lobby will be stronger in areas that have infrastructure built for fossil fuels. The rest of the world that we're looking at that really are targeting solar are places like India and China, places where they don't have the energy infrastructure. And that will really drive a lot of the huge numbers in solar that we'll see in the future. But we all need to make that change, and so we can.
This is the most massive wishful thinking on behalf of the panel. I mean, I don't see the share price of these fossil fuel companies collapsing yet, on the basis that no one's going to want them in 10 to 15 years' time.
You do. If you look at the big 6 generators of people in Germany, their share price has completely collapsed. And that story in Germany is going to repeat itself over here.
You really believe we're going to go on the energy vendor route, do you?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, I think there's going to be a carbon price as well, and that will
We've
make
talked
it
about
very...
this for years, and the carbon price is on the floor. Does anyone have the guts to really deliver a carbon price?
The more and more that high-profile companies and individuals are getting involved and groups are getting involved, the more we will see that. We're now seeing Apple, Warren Buffett, who are some big names of people everywhere investing big time in solar, divesting in fossil fuels, and that will start to change.
Well, coming on the point, I mean, we're seeing some major media campaigns now about disinvestment in fossil fuels, the idea of the carbon bubble. This is certainly a major concern for fossil fuel large companies, some of whom may have to come back and, let's see the resurgence of BP Solar and these companies seeing the writing on the wall.
Then we'll also get through the power price, and solar is already driving down the power price, and that will hurt the profitability of the fossil fuel generators.
Okay, we have a question. Yes, gentlemen in the corner there. Yep, lovely, at the back. Thank you. Yes, sir. Name and question, please.
I'm Chris Hobson from Recharge Magazine. Can I ask the panels, sometimes people say to me that the problem with renewables business is that they're too nice. I'm sure one of the stories you've all spotted in the last week was the Guardian story about how much money, in fact, Shell were doing in undermining the 2030 targets and ending up with 27%. And the fact that Cameron actually bought into that. Shouldn't you be fighting more fire with fire? I'm particularly interested in what Paul thinks about that one.
Can you give us a tactic that you'd like to see them employed at 5:30?
Having come 10 years ago from a fossil fuels magazine, I'm well aware of how much effort the gas industry and Shell put into undermining everything you're trying to do in this room. I'd be quite interested to see whether you could do it in perhaps a cleverer way, or if you actually feel different things could be done from the tactics that you've actually employed in the past.
Paul, you need to raise your game to punch harder.
I do hear what you're saying, and we've come out of a very, very tough battle from 2011 where there was an awful lot of strong lobbying against cutting tariffs and the negativity that went with that and the fallout in the market. We, following the I think May 13 closure of the RO closure last year, we tried to raise money for the Solar Independence campaign, and we managed to raise £120,000, which for us that was a pretty decent effort. But what was interesting was that none of the investors, none of the law firms wanted to have anything to do with it because they were worried about the negativity that went from an investment standpoint. So if we are to be taken seriously as an industry, it is very important that we include the investors and the bigger commercial organisations out there who want to play a more tactical, positive approach rather than the more negative lobbying approach. I'm sure Jeremy Leggett, who's very strongly towards lobbying and the anti-fracking groups, that is a very, very important part of it. The NGOs play a very important part, but we are caught between trying to decide how do we balance the seriousness of our technology going forward rather than being a niche organisation. So can we be both is really your question, and do we have the funding around this room to make a serious effort towards that?
I think the STA has been very key in bringing in another source of currency, which is public approval and educating the public. That's something that the fossil fuel industry does not have on its side. And that's something that, although we do not have the finance to combat and compete, that's something that they've been able to do, and I think will continue to help us.
Ask the gentleman at the back. Do you think it would be, you just say yes or no to this, do you think it would help if we didn't have 3 separate organisations representing solar, the SDA, the REA and the BPVA? Could they punch harder if they all got together?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Can I just have a show of hands? Who in this room thinks that there should be, these 3 groups should really get together and on solar lobby together, or possibly merge? Okay, and who doesn't? Okay, a very strong message from this room, and I know that empires don't always want to merge, but you ought to be strongly considering it if you want to be heard. You want to be heard more clearly. Yes, I have a question myself, but if anybody's thinking, I shall just put one in myself in that case. You may not think this is your responsibility, but we've heard a lot of talk this morning about the importance of matching solar with energy storage. Do you, I'll start with you, Paul, actually, do you think this is something which solar ought to be doing more to sort of get into bed with, if you like, rather than saying it's a separate business? I mean, isn't it something that makes solar attractive?
For sure. I mean, it is absolutely the long-term future, because, you know, renewables right now is this sort of variable technology, whereas fossil fuels are baseload. But the point is, as Nick Boyle has pointed out earlier in the session, you know, solar plus wind. Let's not forget wind, because you know they operate at different times of the season. Plus storage gives you baseload. And the baseload seems to be the most important asset to us, and then we can then decide how we use that variability, whether it's gas or other technologies to feed into that. But that is absolutely the long-term future. It is trying to figure out which part of storage is the right part of storage to invest in. But we are in bed with storage, and it's growing.
Okay, can I ask you, as a company that's involved in this, I mean, do you flirt with the storage people?
We float with the storage people. We're trying to float with the storage people. I think it's an inevitable partner for solar, and so I'm trying to understand the best process, whether it be lithium-ion or chemical process, understanding that side of things, and then understanding how the best mix of how we can do it. You know, is what we're interested in. We're currently putting our final, I think it's a 1 megawatt utility scale battery onto one of our sites to do some, operational data and understand how it works.
Sorry, that's on one site in Britain at the moment, or elsewhere. And do you think that's going to be quite a common feature of sites, that they will come not only with a field but with a big battery?
I think that it could easily be. Yeah, and I think it should be, especially with balancing the grid and all the other benefits that it brings. It's a no-brainer, and the costs are dropping as solar has. And
the battery costs are following a similar downward trajectory. That's
yeah.
right. Yes, gentleman at the back there, and a great guy over. Oh no, it's Peter. Looking forward to a good question. Yeah.
Shall we? Peter Bennett from Solar Power Portal. The polling from DEC shows that solar is the most popular form of energy generation amongst Brits. And I guess this was particularly for Kate. How do you think that the industry can take advantage of this, really use it for its own gain?
I think there's a million ways, and I think we're just barely tapping into that. It's part of our lack of finance in our industry, and deep pockets that we're still kind of new. That we haven't not only the time and the capability with numbers of people to be able to do it, but there's loads of ways. I think the first thing we need to get people aware of what we're doing is a focused communication and focused work, and that will take a combined effort of all the trade associations, as well as ideas of how to communicate to the public, other companies, and the UK government that we're serious, and that it's not to be working, it's already working. More involvement with our Solar Independence campaign that the SDA is putting together, and the Solar Independence Day is great, where you have people anywhere coming to visit a solar farm, or someone who's got solar on their roof, or a company. That kind of thing will really help raise the awareness and make sales as well.
Paul Bridger, why do you think it is popular? What's the key to its popularity?
I think it's just a very democratic, easily understandable technology. I mean, we also deal with solar thermal at the Solar Trade Station, which is a much more complex thing to understand. But you know, it's this brilliant idea that you've just got a panel, the sun shines on it, which is a free source of energy, and it generates electricity. You see how much electricity is generated, and you can use it. And it can go on your home, it can go on commercial rooftops on the land. And you know, if you don't like the look of it on your home, it doesn't stop you caring whether it's on a rooftop or necessarily on land. So it seems to be very easily acceptable in comparison to all of the other technologies that are out there.
And you just gave me your 10-point plan for approval, particularly of land-based solar. Are you concerned that if it's applied badly or recklessly, that popularity could diminish?
Definitely. You know, particularly, I'm sure Jonathan will have some comments on it as well, but you know, it is all about, you know, trying to make the best use of the land, being well screened. You know, if it takes a number of projects, and let's face it, we've done pretty well. We've got 5 gigawatts of land-based solar, and I think the UK is absolutely leading the way in terms of dual-purpose usage, biodiversity. You know, it's a very exportable product that we've created. Bearing in mind we are a small island, I mean, it's a disproportionate amount of land-based solar that we have in comparison to our overall deployment. That is unusual in most of the European countries.
Unusually high.
It's unusually high, yes.
Unusually high.
In comparison to Europe, because I mean, Germany, who's got nearly 40 gigawatts of solar, the majority of it is on commercial rooftop. But as you've seen today, you know, doing commercial rooftop is far more complex.
But I don't think we should be apologising or getting defensive about our success. You know, these are, you know, these sort of documents, good practice in agriculture, good practice for biodiversity, with a lot of NGOs signed up to it. This is quality stuff, and we should be doing more or less what Baroness Verma was saying earlier, going out and selling it to the rest of the world. We're a chattering nation, we debate and procrastinate everything to death, but we've got something we can build on here, and by God, it's got an 81% public approval rating.
Popularity that's going to slow down the solar farm market. It's the grid.
Before you come on to the grid, I will let you come on to it. I just want to put one thing to you, John. Could you not be doing more to get some of those trusted names, say the environment, in the environment, say the RSPB, say the Wildlife Trust, to come on board with some of the solar people to say, look, we'll vouch for this. It's good for wildlife. It's good for birds and bees. I haven't heard them raising their voices. Shouldn't you be getting them yourself?
They're a little cautious, but their name is on here. We've got the National Trust, we've got the RSPB. The RSPB have a wind turbine at their headquarters in Sandy, in Bedfordshire. The Wildlife Trust, at least one of them, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, has now developed 2 solar farms, generating an income to support the work that they do. I think there is more, perhaps, that some of these environmental NGOs think the RSPB.
So they were a little reluctant, the RSPB.
Well, we would say that, wouldn't you? Because the NFU and the RSPB are quite on the opposite side of the table.
But I mean, they've been very supportive of the RSPB because the wildlife havens, you know, for 25 years in a sort of enclosed area, that, you know, it's the perfect place for birds.
The grid, the big problem in your view?
Well, it's interesting hearing stories through the day of people saying they can't connect rooftop or solar farm projects because of the grid. And a quick survey for people in here, if you've ever had or got a worse offer than 16 million quid for 200 kilowatts. It's not me, but you know, one of the SDA's members does have that.
They would cost you to attach
the project to the grid. And if you're, so just so you're aware, there's an Ofgem consultation on at the moment called Quicker Connections. If you're not aware of it, Google it, look it up and respond to it, because the more evidence we can get into that story to Ofgem to explain the problems of the grid and what the solutions might be, the more we'll be able to move the position. The National Infrastructure Plan is showing that we need to spend about 100 billion on the grid between now and 2030 to enable these renewables. And what we've got to do is find a way of unlocking that 100 billion to allow us to deploy our kit.
Should any of that 100 billion come from you and other renewables, or should it all come from the grid? I mean, if you're introducing something new, is it up for you to share the cost, or is it all up to them? In the end, us, the builder.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point that this Ofgem consultation, Quicker Connections, makes. And ultimately, the consumer pays. The only question is whether they pay through grid charges or they pay through CFD or FIT payments. And you know, there's a debate about which way it should go, but it's going to go to the consumer at the end of the day.
Do you agree, Paul, for instance, that it is in the end going to come from both, or should it all come from the grid?
I would a combination of you know, I think at the moment people seize or the DNOs perhaps see solar as being a problem for the grid, but the reality is once you factor in the bits of storage, you know, it can actually prevent the need for immediate upgrades to the grid, providing we articulate that properly. But you know, we need to take a whole new strategic approach towards fixing the grid, because it's a long-term problem, even though it's also you know, a very much a short-term limiting issue for us. It's the long-term game plan for grid.
Anybody else a chance to put something to that? Yes, gentleman here. Yes.
Do we need to solve the problems of the grid if we marry battery storage with solar?
Do we need to solve the problems of the grid if we marry battery storage with solar? Kate, you want to come in?
As my boss often says, you can't have a, how does he put it, in his Northern Irish way. You can't have a house without the grid, just like you can't have a computer without the internet. It connects us to everything that we need. There will always be need for a grid. However, you know, the island idea is really interesting, and it can be used in areas where it's needed. An island idea where you have a storage connected to your power generation with no connection to the grid. I mean, that can be used in places such as India and other places as those costs fall. But where we have an existing grid that can be updated, it makes sense to do it.
No, I'm saying, do we need to upgrade the grid, or can we live with the grid we've got?
Oh, I see.
If the solar system is married with batteries, then what it feeds in 24 hours.
I think it's you're right. So if you get solar plus storage gives you baseload, that solves a lot of the problem. But you're always going to have areas, for example, commercial and industrial estates that need to export electricity at weekends because they're making too much, or residential areas which aren't using enough electricity during the day, so they're exporting during the working day but using more at weekends. So there's a balancing need between different geographies and different styles of buildings and different styles of areas, which we need to think about in a way that we haven't thought about before, because the grid was designed, as we all know, to take power from central power stations and distribute it out. And I think storage will solve a lot of the problems, but it's not going to solve everything.
Yeah. Yeah, the gentleman at the back, he's asked a question before. Anybody else feeling like coming in? No, yes, sir.
Could I just ask you to kind of perhaps comment on your view as to on grid issues as to whether you'd like to see a wider grid? I'm not necessarily talking about the super grid as the wind industry's pushing for many years, but for instance, the current proposals on wind, as you probably know, are for a kind of North Sea grid. How much of a support? How much would you support those kind of ideas and visions? And could you also give a view with regard to energy union and the necessity for that in Europe?
Paul, can I come to you first? What is it you'd like to see with the grid?
Certainly grid is not my level of technical expertise on it, so I might bump it off to Ben. But
Ben, no, I won't make you squirm. Ben.
So again, to quote a conversation I was having earlier today with Lars from NIAS, the sun moves across Europe sort of hour by hour, and to have an interconnected grid across Europe which takes the energy from where it's sun needed to the place it's needed is very sensible. Equally, the wind, as a wind front comes in, it hits one side of Europe and it moves across. And so we do need those interconnectors, and Britain suffers because it's much less connected than the rest of Europe. Funding them is quite a challenge.
Jonathan, can I just put something to you? Do you think on farms in the next 10 years, say, that solar panels will be a common site, an occasional site mixed with other things? What's your vision for solar on our farm?
Well, you know, our own market research already shows that fully 1/3 of all farms have got some kind of renewable energy diversification. And in a few cases, just get a few modules on the farmhouse, a small single wind turbine or something of the sort. But that's the level of uptake we're already seeing. So we're well past the sort of early adopter stage. It's all now the sort of me too and repeat business. And old Fred down the road says he's making a lot of extra money now, so he's going to be able to hand the business on to his kids. You know, I think through a demonstration effect, this is going to become increasingly commonplace. I mean, we were on a little field trip yesterday just south of Bristol, every village you drive through there, you see solar absolutely everywhere. And whether it's on domestic households or whether it's on agricultural buildings, I think this is just increasingly becoming part of the landscape.
Very good. I'm just going to ask you all to be a politician in a sense for a moment, or to represent your industry. And if you were knocking on the door, Kate, of a voter saying why they should spend a little bit more on their electricity in order to support solar, how would you sell it?
Well, I'd say the more that they spend on their electricity bill to support renewables, the less they'll spend in taxes for fossil fuels. And you know, the more that we divest and divest in fossil fuels and invest in renewable energy, we'll get our new renewable energy to a point where we have that support.
So short-term pain for a long-term gain, is that? No, what do you say?
If they're interested, I'd say it's a foreign policy issue, because we've got to solve the climate change challenges, which will or could, if in the worst case, result in foreign policy chaos and immigration. We all know what a challenge the immigration issue is in this election, and I don't want it to get any worse.
So this is, if we don't do it, climate change will get worse, we'll see greater foreign policy issues, immigration pressures, things like that. Yeah. Okay, sort of British security argument. Paul?
I think our strongest argument is still the economic argument, in terms of, you are investing now for savings down in the next 5, 10, 15 years, in terms of it will actually have a reduced price on your electricity bills as time goes on. So, if you've got one thing that you can say to them, I think the economic argument is probably the strongest one. I'd love it to be the environmental one, but I still don't think that's a big enough buying power in the UK yet.
And what about the sort of UK PLC argument, as in sort of good for jobs, good for engineering, good for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great little thing to go and throw out there in terms of jobs and all those bits and pieces. But at the end of the day, you've got to figure out why would they want to go and support this? Why are they happy to have £11 on their electricity bill? Well, if they know that they may be saving £20 on their electricity bill in 10 years' time, I think that's easier to hit them directly with.
I know you're not a sort of direct campaigner for solar, but what would you say?
Well, it's a disruptive technology. It's a technology that's happening elsewhere. Why should we allow Britain to get left behind?
Very good. Well, I've just got a couple of closing remarks first of all. If we could just show our appreciation for the panel.